Barcelona
to retrieve the evidence.
Dr. Bravo,
Hi.
are you ready for the trip?
I'm ready for the trip. I'm so excited. We're
Okay.
going to do some very wonderful work, and I can't wait to get the results.
Upon arriving in Spain to look at the being for the very first time, I was kind of skeptical. It was definitely a game changer for my thought process to actually see it in person than to see it on film. The first thing we had to do was go to the radiology lab because we needed x-rays and CAT scans before we did anything.
Porque esto ya se lo comenté que era un poco difícil de hacer. Es explicar,
The best we can get.
lo mejor que podamos. Porque evidentemente no se puede manipular para nada.
No.
The head radiologist at the center saw the being and was quite impressed. And the first thing she said was, "Wow, that looks like an alien."
We haven't. That's really okay. This is fabulous.
That's pretty good for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
This one is complete.
And when the CAT scan images started coming up on the computer, it was just profound. And I saw inside the bone, and I saw, organs and lung material, brain material. I knew that this was not a hoax, it was not fake, that this was actually some sort of living creature.
Right, well, if somebody made it, they have a future in microsurgery because they were smart enough then to put in these millimeter-wide bone holes where the arteries go in to feed the bone marrow. And so now the challenge is to prove what it is, right? My interest, frankly, is to disprove that it's anything unusual or anything paranormal. I would like to prove that this is human. I would like to prove that this is just an interesting mutation, but obviously if you leave your mind open, or I should say if you leave your mind closed to alternatives, you'll never see what those alternatives might actually be. In every situation with scientists, your reputation's at stake. I have every expectation that even doing this is going to lead to some ribbing from some of my colleagues, right? But I think that that's perfectly acceptable because at the end of the day, who's going to validate these things? If someone isn't willing to step forward and do it right, then you're going to have it sitting out there forever, hanging in limbo, right? I mean, if you let other people and their opinions stop you from believing what you know to be true, then all you're doing is stopping the possibility of progress.
Anytime anybody tries to study this subject seriously, we're subject to ridicule. I'm a full professor at a relatively major university, and I'm certain that my colleagues at the university laugh at me and hoot and holler behind my back when they hear that I have an interest in studying unidentified flying objects.
There's really a subtle kind of suppression at play here. You don't worry about what the CEO of Enron thinks about what you say. You worry about what your friends think. You worry about what your parents would think if you posted whatever you care about on Facebook or something.
We take the risk to appear to be a crackpot. There may be people who are going to be threatened by that for any number of reasons.
My feeling was that I was involved in a lot of strange activities, so I tried to say to myself, let's not look at this with too much exposure and mention it because there's a question of credibility.
This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers.
MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network, and it was founded in 1969 by Walt Andrus. And our mission statement is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. MUFON is the world's largest UFO investigative organization. We have approximately 3,000 members worldwide. Approximately 500 of those have their PhDs. These are people who really would like to delve deep into the UFO phenomenon and try to figure out not only what it is, but how it's happening.
Armed with what he thought was some of the best available evidence, including the Phoenix Lights, Steve Greer organized a Project Starlight briefing before several Congress Pentagon, and White House staff members. Things seem to be on track for disclosure.
Of the device and the internal, all of it, with a lot of detail, and this is a cutaway. This was done and escaped government control, whereas the Bentwaters case took 20-some years in England. So this is in our possession and not the Ministry of Defense. So,
where it would never be found.
Where it'd be going to a black hole, right?
But then, the bad news came. Sherry Adamiak, Steve's partner and longtime friend, along with Steve and another team member, were all suddenly diagnosed with a malignant cancer.
I've had these experiences since I was a child or a young man, but to articulate them so other people understand them, I need someone with capacity to hear it. She was that person. I mean, it's been,
you can't resolve
it's
things.
been very hard for me.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I know.
Get up
I know
every
it has
day,
been.
you know, but. One of the last places she wanted to come was here. So she asked that her ashes be placed on the land. So we put her ashes around that tree.
I don't take anything for granted, frankly, and so each time that I do a presentation or lead a group, I think this may be the last time. The thing that has kept me going the most is not any external thing, but the experience of that near-death experience where I know that there's an aspect of us that doesn't die. That is why I can go mano a mano with these elements and not be afraid. I shouldn't say be afraid, not stand down. Everyone has fear. I've certainly had my fears. But it gives you an anchor so that you can go forward.
More than ever, Dr. Greer understood what he had always sensed. It was not the power of a cosmic field or quantum vacuum that would propel us into a new world. It was the mind.
This really is the opening to an entirely new science of consciousness.
You can maybe think of consciousness as a television set. On the TV screen, you see pictures and sounds and so forth. And if you tried to find out where that was coming from and you looked inside the television, you're not going to find it. It's not there. The signal is in the radio waves around it, invisible to us, that's being interpreted by the television as pictures and sounds. So this is very much like the state of how we understand the mind and consciousness.
Dr. John at Princeton proved that putting your awareness on a device that was a random number generator would affect it.
So you have this random number generator and it's producing 50-50 ones and zeros. And then you introduce a person into the picture and you tell them, try to affect it with their mind. Think more ones or more zeros. You measure that, and sure enough what they found was that there are more ones or more zeros being produced that correlate to that person's intention. So we can see effects being produced forwards and backwards in time, which is really strange. Distance doesn't seem to matter as much. You can get the same strength of effects if you're right in front of the REG or if you're on the other side of the planet.
Consciousness is a non-local field, and it isn't limited to your brain waves and body.
Dr. John once had the opportunity to ask the Dalai Lama if he thought the random number generators themselves were conscious. And the Dalai Lama thought about it, and his reply was that if you think they're conscious, then they're conscious.
Just like consciousness can have positive effects on the zeitgeist or ether, it can also work the other way.
Unfortunately, when you start to deal with inventors who have anomalous results that seem to be over unity, paranoia seems to accompany that process. And John Searle is famous for having a circular magnetic device that has both energy and propulsion built into one unit.
And the electric company felt that this guy was stealing money, took him to court, went to jail, his house caught fire, and all of his property and all of his designs burned.
The concept of freedom, this sort of idea of people having the liberty to pursue happiness and to pursue abundance, this has been completely, in a sense, turned upside down.
We actually reprinted a report on the military involvement of the Department of Energy. And it's so extensive, it's the major operation that goes on there.
There have been over 5,000 patents that have been sequestered by the national security state, taken out of the public domain. Many of them deal with energy technologies.
It's a policy that the military seems to feel is necessary for national security. However, at this point, we often wonder, 50 years after World War II and the Cold War, whether such sequestering is necessary.
Suppression of new technology would be an obvious plague on the idea and strength of a free market system. Yet, it still seems to happen right in front of our eyes.
And this is a huge controversy, one of the largest, maybe most intense controversies in the history of science. There's nothing worse, I found, than suggesting to academic physicists in particular, and academics in general, that they are not only wrong, but disastrously wrong, catastrophically wrong. The cold fusion patents have not been approved. They will not get through. American citizens are being denied their constitutional rights. I inadvertently was looking through some piles of paper that had been given to me in a casual manner by all these hot fusion physicists as they were trying to do their calorimetric repeat of the Pons-Fleischmann experiment. And I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like monkey business to me at the time, and it has turned out to be exactly that. It was represented as a negative result when it was positive. And that data is scientific fraud, as far as I'm concerned. It's been referred to legal authorities in the government. I asked for a review at MIT, got nowhere. If this type of manipulation had occurred in any legitimate research area, such as cancer research, AIDS research, global warming research, anything that's accepted as reasonable to be researching, the people would lose their jobs, they wouldn't be in science. And yet, these people today, their data is used today, to year 2000, and all before, to reject patents. Yes, there is serious criminal activity going on that ultimately must be rooted out.
It became very clear to me that, you kind of had a tiger by the tail here, and that this was serious.
For a moment, Dr. Greer considered shutting everything down. He had been threatened and swindled far too many times. Sherry was gone. He had no office, no staff, no money.
Back in 1998, I was given information by a friend that Dr. Greer was having a conference.
Literally the month that Sherry Adamek passed away, within 30 days, I have this scheduled event.
So I went to the conference and learned some things and listened.
And so she just on a lark came, and she's an emergency doctor like I am.
And what really grabbed my attention was he was getting all this information from military witnesses.
That was in 1998. By 2000, when we were planning and storyboarding and working the whole disclosure project event out and pulling together all these hundreds of witnesses, we didn't really have the funding to do it. But she got so supportive and involved that she lived very modestly and took all of her excess income and donated it.
And I want to acknowledge some amazing people that are here. Dr. Jan Bravo, without whom we would not have the Disclosure Project.
But it's not just the funding she's provided, it's the moral support and the encouragement and the friendship. And so she's just become a very key person. And, you know, it's sort of metaphysical and odd that literally the month that Sherry Adamek passed away, within 30 days, I have this scheduled event.
Not alone anymore. With the support of a loyal team, Dr. Greer grew his witness list from a couple dozen to over 200.
And see that little, the little dot right there? That dot don't belong there. I said, I'm one of those, what you would call the high government official in the FAA. I was the division chief. There was only 3 or 4 down from the admiral.
I was awarded the Air Force Guided Missile Insignia. I was the first photographic officer in the Air Force to get they called it the missile badge.
So I forgot who it was that called, but he says, we got a problem here. What's the problem? He says, well, it's that UFO.
We weren't launching real nuclear weapons, we were launching dummy warheads. They were the exact size, shape, and dimension and weight. And we were looking down southwest, and the missile popped up through the fog. It was just beautiful. And I hollered, there it is. And our guys on our M45 tracking mount with 180-inch lenses on it got it. We sent the film back down to Vandenberg.
The Japanese airline, 747, was coming from the northwest, going across the Alaskan territory. He called and asked the controller if the controller had any traffic at his altitude. His radar is picking up a target. He sees this target with his eye, and the target, the way he described it, a huge ball with lights running around it, and I think he said it was like 4 times as big as a 747.
I was called into Major Mansman's office at the 1st Strategic Aerospace Division headquarters. And Major Mansman said, watch this. There was the launch from the day or 2 before it at Big Sur. We watched that stage burn out, we watched the 2nd stage burn out, we watched the 3rd stage burn out, and it's going like this. And into the frame came something else. It flew into the frame like this, and it shot a beam of light at the warhead, fires another beam of light, goes around like this, we're going like this, fires another beam of light, goes down like this, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space.
They brought in 3 people from the FBI, 3 people from the CIA, and 3 people from Reagan's scientific study team, and I don't know who the rest of the people were. When they got done, they actually swore all these other guys into this never took place.
Who said that? Who was saying?
This was one of the guys from the CIA.
Now I saw that. I don't give a goddamn what anybody else says about it. I saw that on film. Phil Klass can kiss my ass. He wasn't there. I was.
He said this is the first time they ever had 30 minutes of radar data on a UFO.
He said, you are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this never happened. So I said, yes, sir, and walked out, and that was the last I talked about it for 18 years.
I had the original video that I took, and I had the pilot's report, and I had the FAA's first report that was all downstairs on my table. They didn't ask for that, so I didn't give it to them.
There are things that I know about that I did in the service that I won't talk about to you now because they're top secret, and I could get my ass in trouble for talking about them. If you parse what Major Mansman said, he said, you are to say, this never happened. Well, that's not classifying it top secret, is it? And I was a part of a United States Air Force cover-up for 18 years.
But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight?
What we photographed up there affected me for the rest of my life and made a huge impact on my understanding of the universe and of governmental manipulation of our minds.
Now, with the witnesses on his side, Dr. Greer had the firepower to attack Washington again.
We are not alone. That's the message a group of pilots, scientists, and former government officials want Congress to hear.
21 members of that group already have testified in Washington for what's known as the Disclosure Project.
And we had all volunteers who organized that whole event. And there was no paid staff. So when people look at that whole period, we didn't have an office, a secretary, and one paid staff person. But we did it.
Dr. Stephen Greer heads up the Disclosure Project, a group that compiles information from people who say they've encountered extraterrestrial forms of life.
20 years ago, in 1980, I was a security specialist assigned to RAF Bentwaters. Objects made incursions over our WSA, fired pencil-thin beams of light into them, and adversely affected the ordnance, possibly.
There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive.
What do members plan to do with their information? They hope Congress and President Bush take notice.
We are asking for the U.S. Congress and for President Bush to move towards an official inquiry and disclosure on this subject.
Those that don't want to believe you will never believe you anyway, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the truth.
A spokesperson for the Senate Science, Technology, and Space Committee says no congressional hearings are planned right now. Elaine Quijano, CNN Headline News, Washington.
I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people. Thank you.
The number of people Dr. Greer had managed to get behind him was monumental. In a perfect world, an event of this proportion, with that amount of coverage, would have been enough to start a legitimate movement. But of course, we hardly live in a perfect world.
Yeah, don't say it. It's on, you know it, right? I don't know, guy. Everything's fucked up.
9/11 became the mother of all news stories and completely changed the game for everyone.
Fear, panic, and strife were imprinted in the public consciousness. To what end? Not to go after Al-Qaeda, but rather to invade the sovereign nation of Iraq. Given such a drastically overt misstep on the part of a U.S. government led by an oil family, the question on some people's minds is whether or not this disaster was exploited, or worse, engineered. The Gulf of Tonkin in the Vietnam War, Chiang Kai-shek in the Korean War. False flag operations are nothing new. However, according to some, the ultimate card to play might be yet to come.
How do you grow the $1 trillion military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about into a $2 or $3 trillion program? You got to have a bigger enemy out there.
Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about space-based weapons. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. In 1977, I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries, and in that room were a lot of charts on the walls with enemies, identified enemies, names that people had never heard of, names like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. But we were talking then about terrorists, the potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before. And they continued the conversation about how they were going to antagonize these enemies, and that at some point there was going to be a war in the Gulf.
According to these theorists, after the military-industrial complex had its war against terrorism, the next enemy that Dr. von Braun identified on Earth would be third world country fanatics. But with no more enemies left, the people would soon be taught to look to space.
The next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card, and remember, Carol, all of it is a lie.
99% of all the information out in the public on this subject is well-crafted disinformation designed to scare people to support the next phase in global warfare. And this kind of corruption is why the only things that are being made on this subject are things that redound to paranoia and fear and the military-industrial complex.